Hey, what's up guys, TotallyDubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the AOC Q3279VWFD8. Now before you think, wait a second, I've already seen this panel, well, you weren't too far off the truth, because I have previously reviewed the Q32979VWF. Now that seems very similar to the current model that I've got in front of me, and that's simply because the old model, which I reviewed on YouTube and will be linked down in the description below, was a £200 VA monitor. Now this monitor that I've got in front of me is an IPS panel, and from what I've heard from AOC is that the older model with a VA panel is going to be discontinued, or should I say the IPS panel will take over from the VA. Now, if you're wondering why, well, I'll get into that in just a bit. But in terms of specs, they're absolutely identical, other than the fact that one has an IPS panel and the other one has a VA panel. So going through the specs, in case you're not aware of the monitor or you'd like to know a little bit about it, it's got a 1440p resolution. It runs at 75 Hertz natively, and I did try overclocking it and it wouldn't overclock any more than 75 Hertz. It has a quoted response time of 5 milliseconds. It has an IPS panel, as I mentioned before. It runs at a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's a massive 31.5 inch display as well. In terms of inputs, you've got VGA, display ports, HDMI and DVI to play around with a headphone jack. There is no speaker that's included. You can of course route sound via HDMI or DisplayPort and then use it via the headphone jack output, but other than that you won't have it enabled. Other than that, all the other specs will be down in the description below, so make sure you check that, especially the size. Now you might be able to see that on my IKEA Freddy desk it's just about fitting in terms of the frame. It's pretty much cutting it short, so let me just show you guys. If you're able to see over here, it is really close, and I just kind of have to duck underneath to sort of see my tab. So if you're going to be getting this monitor and you have such as the IKEA threaded desk, then I would definitely suggest either removing the top stand or the bottom stand for you guys to actually use it in its full glory. But for testing purposes, it's not a big deal for me. Now, other than that, what we'll want to talk about is the price. Now the old model came out around £200. Right now I think prices are a little bit inflated, around £250, which would make sense if it's being phased out. This monitor that we have in front of us, the IPS monitor, can be found for around £200 to £220. Links will be down in the description below, so make sure you check them out. So very much the same sort of price range as well. I'd also like to mention this comes with AMD Freesync. Unfortunately, I've got an NVIDIA GTX 1080. I say unfortunately, it's a fantastic card, but what I'm trying to say over here is that I couldn't test its FreeSync capabilities or its FreeSync range, but I'll be sure to check that with AOC and link it down in the description below, so you have the full FreeSync range if you've got a compatible AMD graphics card. Now, as I said before, this doesn't overclock more than 75 Hertz. Default is 75 Hertz out of the box, and that's at 1440p. Of course, you'll have to make sure you're running on DisplayPort or HDMI in order to output that resolution at that frame rate. So just bear that in mind. If you're going to be using VGA for some weird reason, then you won't be getting those that sort of resolution. So now let's move on to the build quality. Now the build quality of the monitor hasn't changed again. It's got a same plastic stand which looks metal, like a brushed aluminium look to it. There's a silver plastic stand which provides only a tilt adjustment. And the tilt adjustment is nice. It's enough that you'd want, but there's no sort of pivot adjustments or rotating or anything like that. So it's pretty basic as far as stands go. Now the monitor's OSD is comprehensive. Again, I'm not real big fan of the off-center buttons which are placed over here, but in terms of the OSD itself, it has a full set of controls, and the set of controls that you can go through, I'm just going to go through them now so you guys can see them, but it's very much standard with all AOC or Philips monitors. If you've come across them in the past, then there's not going to be anything new, but I should show it just in case you're not accustomed to them. Now in terms of game mode, I've put the overdrive to strong, and I'll get that in just a bit. These are just extra settings you'd want to go through. Luminance, you can see I've got brightness at 100, and I've got the color temperature at user. You can use it at sRGB as well, but actually for once, out the box, user was fantastic, whereas with the old VA panel I had to adjust the reds, greens and the blues, specifically the blues, because it was had like a massive blue tinge to it when it came out of the box. So it's very nice to see that AOC have kind of addressed this and kind of calibrated the monitor a little bit better. Now let's talk about that panel. Now it's got an IPS panel, so contrast ratio is not going to be as good as a VA panel, and when I put this across on a calibrator, the results were pretty much as I would expect. But I should say, well, I say as I would expect, they are also very impressive and way better than a lot of £200 monitors I've come across, let alone 1440p monitors. So first of all, in terms of overall brightness, it gets to 250 nits. That's bright enough, just about bright enough for a medium lit room, but if you've got a bright sunlit room, I think you're going to kind of struggle to see all the beautiful details that you'd like to see on this monitor. Usually I look for around 300 to 350 nits for a monitor. Obviously if you're going to be gaming or using the monitor in a low light condition, then you won't have any problem with this figure. By comparison, the old monitor got to around 200 nits, so it's very much impressive to see this. Now these results are based on the sRGB standard, and off that I got an average delta of 1.29, whereas on the old monitor I got 1.93 with a maximum of 3.87. What does that mean? Basically this monitor is a little bit more color accurate when it's if you're going to be editing or using it in sRGB mode. In other words, photo editors, video editors will be pleased to know this, and for those of us who are just your average Joe like myself or gamers, then you're going to know that this monitor is going to be able to reproduce colors a little bit more accurately. So what you see on like a billboard or whatever it is what you're going to be expecting on your screen, if that makes sense. Now the contrast ratio is a lot lower than the VA panel, simply because of its technology. The IPS panel gets 1,360 to 1 contrast ratio, whilst the old one got 4,200. Now what does this mean? Well, essentially contrast ratio is the whites and blacks that you'd get in an image, and I should say that the older one, the VA panel, was able to reproduce white and blacks a lot better. So if I just show you this in terms of this image, for example, you would see a lot darker tones around the bottom over here and a lot whiter tones and a lot more accurate whites where the shuttle is taking off. This is probably not a good one. This one, again, you would see a nice contrast between the animal over here and the greens over here, whereas on this IPS panel it's a little bit more blended in. It's not to say it's bad, far from it. It's more the fact that when you're comparing the technologies like VA versus IPS, it's what you would expect. It's just expected that you're going to get a lower contrast ratio, but that's not necessarily a massively bad thing or something that's really going to concern a lot of people. If, however, you're going to be gaming a lot on, like, let's say, a Batman, Dark Knight Rises or something like that, it's an old school game. If you're going to be playing games like that, which are very much loads of dark scenes, you might notice that the dark scenes don't look as black as they should. They will look a little bit more greyish. But even from someone like myself who plays a variety of games, I had no problems playing with this IPS panel. In fact, in my opinion, because of its color accuracy being that slightly bit better, I felt myself more engaged with the picture I'm seeing in front of me. So your mileage may vary, as they say, but that's just my personal experience. Other than that, its sRGB gamut coverage was about 90%, 91%, which is pretty much bang on what the old one got. As I said, it was calibrated to sRGB with the sRGB mode selected on the OSD, so therefore Adobe and DCI-P3 were around 63 to 65%, again to be expected if you are not testing it in those color gamuts. So now, in terms of image quality, my personal experience is I much prefer this IPS panel over the VA panel, simply because out of the box I don't need any sort of calibration, I don't need to fiddle around with anything, and it doesn't have a bluish tinge like that VA panel did. Of course it doesn't have the same sort of contrast ratio as the VA panel, but still you get a fantastic image quality right out the box. Now, one thing I did note with the VA panel that I reviewed previously is that you got some sort of little bit of a kind of, not color shift, but kind of like a sort of gamma shift or something like that when you were looking around left and right from the monitor and not looking dead center. And this is a little bit of the same case with this IPS panel. It seems like they're sort of similar in this respect. If you shift off from the off center, so when you're sitting and you're going to be, I don't know, you have someone next to you looking at the screen, they might not see the exact perfect colors that you are seeing when you're sitting dead onto it. So just worth bearing in mind in terms of that. Now, before concluding the picture sort of quality section, I'd like to talk about the backlight bleed and also in terms of the color, the brightness uniformity. Now, the brightness uniformity is pretty much similar to the one that I previously reviewed, the VA panel. It's not great across the board. It's decent. It's perfectly acceptable for your everyday gamer or your everyday browser or thing like that, someone who's browsing. But again, for photo editors or video editors, if you're going to be adjusting colors on the top left-hand side or bottom right-hand side with something in the middle or something like that, some sort of tabbed sort of screens, then you might find that the brightness uniformity will be off on the edges. As I said, color accuracy itself was very good, but when it comes to photo editing, video editing, you'd want a perfect brightness uniformity across the screen, and that's why professionals pay a lot of money for fantastically uniform panels. £200, you just have to get just expect what you're getting. It is not aimed for those professionals, but nevertheless, it's decent. It's just not the best that I've seen, with quite a bit of variation from around 15% or so variation from the center point. Now, in terms of backlight bleed, it's something that I got asked quite a lot, and I always test it, but nevertheless thought to mention it in this video. I didn't notice a massive amount of backlight bleed. If anything, it's complete panel lottery. I noticed a little bit backlight bleed on the bottom left-hand corner, but it's nothing to be overly concerned about. This is pretty much all IPS panels have some sort of backlight bleed, or most panels have some sort of backlight bleed. So it's not something that I was overly concerned about, and when I completely blacked out my room and was looking at a black image, I didn't really notice something that I really should mention to you guys on the video. But nevertheless, I know people are going to ask me, so I thought to cover it. Now, almost most importantly, let's go into the gaming performance. Now, I always like playing Counter-Strike. However, with this monitor, I've also been playing other games such as Destiny 2, Overwatch, which are a little bit more demanding, or graphically demanding than Counter-Strike ever will be. But nevertheless, I just want to share my experiences. Now, the reason I put Counter-Strike is simply because it's one of those games that's really competitive and the sort of game that you'd want the best sort of response time and input lag from a monitor. Now, I must say, just very much like the old monitor, the input lag is actually very impressive. I would say at a stretch, it's not as responsive in terms of its input lag as the old monitor. However, in terms of my gun accuracy, as you saw there, is absolutely terrible. It hasn't changed. So what I'm trying to say here is that the monitor still responds really fantastically. I would personally prefer the input lag of the older one, which I felt was slightly faster in terms of my mouse clicks and shooting and whatnot. However, in terms of the ghosting, and that's something that a lot of people complained about in my video when they bought the monitor and figured, actually, when it comes to games like, say, Destiny 2, which are very graphically intense, I got a lot of smearing and a lot of ghosting. And that's something I noticed when I had overdrive set to strong, even whilst playing Counter-Strike. However, over here, the overdrive is even, I think it's still set to strong, and yet there's very minimal ghosting. So what AOC have done over here in terms of reducing the amount of ghosting and overshoot that you get is absolutely fantastic. I would happily play a game of Counter-Strike with this monitor with overdrive set to strong. If, however, you feel that it's still a little bit too much for you, the ghosting, and believe me, it's going to be a lot less than the previous model, then using it on medium setting really much eliminates all the ghosting that you'd want, and yet gives you quite a nice responsive screen. So in terms of casual gaming, I would say you'd have no problems playing with this on medium, and if your game persists, or your game is able to not be super graphically intense, then you'll find strong setting gets you the most responsive panel and the sort of best gaming experience. So overall, I think what AOC have done over here is absolutely really impressive. Really brought down that ghosting and overshoot that you got with that VA panel. So overall, is this a monitor I would buy? Now, previously I said that the monitor, that VA panel I previously reviewed, was a fantastic purchase. For £200, there's not many monitors that you can come across that have all those specs, 1440p, 75Hz, 31.5 inch, and a really good experience all around with a decent color accuracy. This is very much the same case. If anything, I much preferred this IPS panel. It does everything that the VA panel did. If anything, does it a little bit better. Its color accuracy is a little bit better. It's got slightly better brightness, which means that it's going to be a little bit brighter for sunlit rooms. And also, in terms of its overshoot ghosting, it's greatly reduced. So in other words, AOC have done a fantastic job, and I can see why they're phasing out the VA panel, simply because this IPS panel pretty much takes over and does almost everything as good, if not better, than the previous model. So if you're looking for a gaming monitor or a monitor for browsing the web or casual gaming, whatever it might be, and you want a large 31.5 inch monitor and you want 1440p and you've got a budget of £200, there's absolutely no better monitor than the monitor that you can see in front of you. So there we go, guys. I've been Totally Dubbed. If you've enjoyed this review, make sure you give it a like, comment, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below if you would buy this monitor or if you have bought it, and let me know your experiences. And that's pretty much it. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye bye.